You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have a strong show for you this week. First, can you guess who has the highest risk of potentially lethal domestic violence of any demographic in the country? Which demographic do you think that is? Well, we're going to find out in a surprising, eye-opening, stunning conversation. And also with us is the author of a book on women artists, how they get disappeared after they die, even if they've been well known in their lifetime, and then also those who are first-rate but never get known in their lifetime because of, sexism. All that, and first we're going to go inside the headlines. We may find ourselves forcibly Trump-obsessed here in the United States, but women around the world continue fighting their and our own battles. For instance, Saudi Arabia, where young, media-savvy women have turned cell phone videos into cries heard round the world. Last month, in April, Dina Ali Lasloum, 24, tried to flee the kingdom for Australia, but her uncles flew to the transit stop in Manila to force her return. She recorded a cell phone video stating, "If my family come for me, they will kill me. If I go back to Saudi Arabia, I will be dead." According to Human Rights Watch, security officials in Manila reported seeing her being taken away with her mouth taped shut and her arms and legs bound with tape to be put on a Saudi airline flight. But her video went viral across the Middle East. Then a medical student named Ala Anazi was detained in Saudi Arabia at the Riyadh airport after she inquired when Dina's flight was landing. In other words, protesters had been alerted on Twitter and had gathered to support Dina. A third woman, a feminist activist, Mariam al-Otaibi, was arrested after fleeing her father's home to live independently in Riyadh, and activists soon spread news of that on social media. The cases are part of a campaign by Saudi women using social media to organize street protests, challenging the de facto ban on driving and the guardianship law that keeps women perpetual minors. Women video themselves without headscarves, and while driving cars, riding bicycles, and wearing trousers, all forbidden. One posted a picture of herself holding a sign in front of her face that read, quote, "I'm a prisoner and my crime is that I'm a Saudi woman," close quote. These courageous women risk arrest and draconian sentences from the religious police who enforce the kingdom's ultra-severe Wahhabi version of Islam. Now back home to Trump dump news. Hero of the first 100 Trump regime days, Walter Schaub, Jr., director of the Office of Government Ethics, has tried several times to use his limited powers to force Trump to honor federal ethics rules as well as the ethics order that Trump himself signed in late January. Historically, the Office of Government Ethics, which supervises a program covering 2.7 million civilian executive branch workers with a staff of only 71 employees and no subpoena powers, well, they just kept a low profile. The OGE was created after the Watergate scandal in 1978, and the Trump regime now gives it a lot to work with. The latest issue raised by Schaub is a challenge to the regime's issuance of secret waivers that allow former lobbyists, now in the administration, to handle matters that they recently lobbied about. Keep at it, Walter. One among many violations of ethics norms is the 50-year-old anti-nepotism law. In 1972, the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel determined that the law did apply to White House staff and would prevent President Nixon from appointing a relative. In 1977, they similarly concluded that President Carter could not legally appoint his son to an unpaid position in the White House. But the day after Trump was sworn in, The Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel determined that the statute does not apply to the president's hiring of White House staff. Hence, we get not only Ivanka, but her hubby, Jared Kushner, whom I'm going to stay on because his multiple roles, none of which he's qualified for in the slightest, have now been updated to include religious relations, LGBT rights, reforming the entire federal government, Middle East peace, the war in Iraq, the U.S.-China relationship, the U.S.-Mexican relationship, and climate change. Somehow, though, Jared found time to not mention on his financial disclosure form that he has a stake in Cadre, that's C-A-D-R-E, which is a tech startup that pairs investors with big real estate projects. This means that Jared, who's now a senior White House official, is currently a business partner of the Goldman Sachs Group and such billionaires as Peter Thiel. Cadre is one of many interests and ties to large financial institutions that Kushner, and this is according to the Wall Street Journal, failed to disclose, with others including loans totaling more than $1 billion from more than 20 lenders to properties and companies owned or part-owned by Kushner. Is anyone doing anything about this? If it was Hillary's son-in-law, there would be 200 different investigative committees in Congress on this subject alone. Meanwhile, United Nations human rights investigators have expressed grave concern over the future of free speech in the United States. This is the first time the UN has ever expressed worry on this subject for this country. But 19 states, including such GOP-governed states as Indiana, Arkansas, Colorado, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Michigan, and Missouri, have introduced bills to curb freedom of expression and the right to protest. This is, quote, an alarming and undemocratic trend, close quote, according to the United Nations. Well, yeah. By the way, did you know that Trump's term for the press as the enemy of the people, which originated with the French Revolution as it slid from idealism into a bloodbath, became infamous in the 20th century from its use by Stalin during his purges? In closing, everybody please remember to breathe after two especially scary events this past week. Trump's signing of his religious freedom executive order was not about an actual bill. It would take Congress to repeal the Johnson Amendment that bars tax-exempt religious organizations from political speech and acts. Second, though House Republicans signed their political death warrants by replacing Obamacare with Trumpcare, the Senate can't wait to revise it. And then there's all those town hall meetings coming up. It's time for a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, but I'll be right back with a guest who knows her subject so well because she's lived it. So don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. My first guest, Stacy Bannerman, is impressive in more ways than one. She's the author of Homefront 911, How Families of Veterans Are Wounded by Our Wars, and another book, When the War Came Home, The Inside Story of Reservists and the Families They Leave Behind. She has testified before Congress a number of times. She authored the ORHB 3391 and independently secured its unanimous passage, which established the Military Family Task Force in Oregon, believed to be the first in the nation. And then she also single-handedly spearheaded state and national legislative campaigns for military family leave, resulting in the passage of Oregon's 2744 and the introduction of the Federal Military Leave Act of 2009. She's created flagship programs for women veterans, caregivers of disabled veterans, military families, incarcerated women, children, and at-risk populations. Stacy Bannerman. Stacy, it's good to have you here.
Oh, good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, my dear, you are quite an extraordinary voice about the so-called new normal. Well, you've done so much in the field that I'll start from now backward. Just recently, you wrote a stunning piece called "The Fatal New Normal for Wives of Veterans" for the Women's Media Center features section on the website, that's womensmediacenter.com, about your own case, which started you on this campaign about what is endured by wives abused and potentially killed by veterans suffering traumatic brain injuries, suffering PTSD, etc. So tell us a little about your own story, and then let's pan out to the broader picture.
Absolutely. Well, I think like most Americans, I was not aware that the families of veterans, and here I'm speaking specifically to veterans with combat injuries, invisible combat injuries, such as PTSD and a TBI, traumatic brain injury. Those are the signature wounds of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But like most Americans, before my husband got mobilized for his first tour in Iraq in 2004, I wasn't aware that the families of veterans are the invisible line item on this nation's war budget. I wasn't aware that when he served multiple tours and came home with a severe post-traumatic stress and a mild TBI, that put him in a category in which he was more likely than not to commit severe domestic abuse or domestic violence. I had, in many respects, kind of been groomed by the DOD and by the family support groups to adapt and adjust to this new normal, as it's called, of a husband who was much more aggressive and hypervigilant and verbally and psychologically abusive. And so I did. And it ended up with a case of where he strangled me to the point of unconsciousness. And unbeknownst to me at the time, that's so common that when I was on the phone with other wives of combat veterans, combat injured vets, approximately a year later, one of the women on the phone asked, who hasn't been strangled by their husband? And there was silence on the line.
Oh, my God.
All of us had been.
Oh, my God. It's a kind of surround the woman with impossible options thing, because cops, if you called the cops would bond with him over the fact that he was a veteran. Other people suggested a restraining order. Well, military or not, those of us who work with women and have for years know that a restraining order is a big ho, 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 because women have even been killed in court while coming to say he's violating the restraining order. This is not necessarily a veteran situation. This is just general wife murder. And the statistics are just absolutely stunning, because it's not easy for her to get up and leave. 97% of military spouses and caregivers for veterans, 97% are women, and they're far more likely to be financially dependent than civilian women. And of course the military still doesn't really want to acknowledge, does it, that abuse is happening?
Right. No, certainly not. And given the post 9/11 wars and the rate, the op tempo, the rate of deployment, frankly, truth be told, the military really hasn't had that much time as well. That is the truth of the matter. But there is, certainly a great reluctance. The valuation of the life of a veteran has been deemed to be higher than the life of the veterans' wives and veterans' families, and that's just based on the facts.
Yeah,
looking at repeatedly the resources that are allocated for veterans and the resources that are not available for the families of veterans, the time and time and time again in which it is the family of the veteran that in one way, shape, form, or another is penalized should they have the wherewithal to try to escape an abusive situation.
Oh, God. Yeah, Stacy, in the piece for the Women's Media Center, you wrote, there was no legal aid or emergency funds or mental health services available to me when you finally fled.
There was nothing.
I lost my health insurance, and the pro bono providers I spoke with said my situation was too complex for them. But there was an abundance of assistance available for my abuser, either from the VA or local nonprofits and advocacy organizations serving veterans. And once he got out of detox and the psych ward, he could still buy a gun. Oh, my God.
Yes. Oh, yes, precisely.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. So what can we do about this? I mean, other than obviously raise the profile of that this is happening. Obviously, this also happens more male on female violence. I don't imagine it is that prevalent when the veteran is a woman and the husband was a civilian.
Well, you'd be surprised.
Really interesting. Tell me.
Well, you would, and because the majority of the research that has been done on veterans, and the reality is that still the veteran population is still overwhelmingly male, although the post 9/11 demographic is certainly changing that. Women veterans are one of the fastest growing demographics within the veteran population.
Mm-hmm.
But here are the things that really are creating the framework for this severe violence in veteran households. I want to be clear, it's not all veterans. What it is most veterans with severe invisible injuries. And that has been a fact of VA research for decades and decades. And as we are seeing more women coming out of combat with those severe invisible injuries, that is raising the likelihood that they also will be perpetrating some domestic abuse, domestic violence against their spouses and partners as well. Yeah. It is less gender-specific than it is combat injury-specific.
Interesting.
And this nation has got to have a conversation, a willingness to have a conversation about how the costs of war are coming home literally and figuratively.
Yes.
The groups that serve the victims of domestic violence need to be increasing their own awareness and education in serving the families of veterans. The groups that are speaking out about, common sense gun laws need to be addressing this population as well. I understand that there's been a real reluctance because of the celebration of the warrior and the warrior mentality, which has been exacerbated by the level of guilt. I think that this country carries having deployed the same troops over and over and over again.
Right.
But the families are paying the price.
Oh, God. Well, I mean, you've written 2 books, I think, on this, yes? Homefront 9/11, How Families of Veterans Are Wounded by Our Wars. That came out 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And When the War Came Home, The Inside Story of Reservists and the Families They Leave Behind. That was in 2006. And you've testified it, before congressional committees, and you've done this remarkable raising of the issue in so many contexts. Do you feel it's beginning to change, or is the military still managing to avoid looking at it? I mean, this has been going on for quite a long time. It's long enough for the military to, get on board, for God's sake.
Yeah, well, let me put it this way: it's not priority one, and until we as a nation and women's organizations, social service agencies, gun control groups, all of those, until all of those begin to identify and language this in the public sphere, this never will be priority one. One of the other things that I have done is written legislation. It's called the Christie-Huddleston Act. And we're looking to get that introduced again this year by my Oregon senators. My friend Christie Huddleston was murdered by her Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran husband, and this bill is in her name and in so many other of the wives of veterans who are no longer with us.
there need to be safe houses, that there need to be financial and emotional and psychological support systems for the women and children, whole families fleeing, and that there need to be special treatment options for the veterans who are caught in this and committing this. But the basic assumption seems so crazy to me. You send a human being into carnage, to commit carnage and witness carnage and suffer carnage, and then you send them back home and and tell the families, hey, he's going to be grumpy a whole lot. This is kind of the new normal. Deal with it and walk away, which is crazy, So even I can see some of the basic 101 things that need to be done. But are there more sophisticated? There must be more sophisticated levels as well that you would recommend.
Well, certainly, and one of them is actually kind of on the legislative agenda right now. There was a letter that just was submitted last week from the Veterans Coalition for Common Sense, and it's calling upon the members of Congress to oppose the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act. What this is about, and General Petraeus is endorsing. He's with this Veterans Coalition for Common Sense, the recognition that veterans with severe mental health disabilities must be prevented from having easy access to firearms.
And I'm sure that the rate of suicides would go down as well.
Significantly.
Is there anything that listeners? This is a very activist audience that we have. Is there anything that they can be doing to help on this front?
Well, and I just want to say, and I am so deeply grateful for that activist audience. And I think on this front, the questions are writing letters to the editor at your local paper asking, just putting this issue out in the public domain. It is about asking your local domestic violence shelter or agency, or even sheriff or police force, what are they doing to support this most vulnerable population? Because wives of combat veterans with PTSD are at the highest risk of potentially lethal domestic violence of any demographic in the country. I think it's also about making sure that the Department of Justice in your state and at the national level, and I've written the language for this, we've got it in the state of Oregon, we need to start identifying those partners of vets with PTSD as being a very vulnerable population, and making sure that there are DOG funds being directed specifically to serve them, given the cultural realities that they are facing. I understand that this new budget being proposed by the individual in the White House is looking to cut funding. We cannot allow that to happen.
Yeah. Well, they claim that, everything is about veterans, and it's so important for veterans, and veterans are our heroes. But I have never heard a mention of this or any of this. And in fact, this is where some of their cuts are coming. So it doesn't augur well for the future. But it always helps when people write their representative, when they write, as you say, their letters to the editor. And is there a website where they can find out more about your activities, Stacy, and follow that?
My website is stacybannerman.com.
And that's STACY and the
BANNERMAN.
Terrific, wonderful. Well, thank you for the work that you do, and for coming and talking to us about it. It is very important work indeed, and work that goes under the radar far too often when it shouldn't go under the radar at all. Thank you again for being with us.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you for helping me to change that.
And now, are you ready? Yes, it's time for the Surrealism Corner. Recently, there's been a furor over a study done in Denmark and published in the JAMA Psychiatry Journal showing increased risk of depression for women using hormone-based contraception. Now, certainly if you use such contraception and you have experienced depression, you should ask your physician about it, and you can read up on the study itself, which is available online. But it's crucial to acknowledge the limitations of this research, which was not a controlled trial and about which it's impossible to establish causality. Previous data looked at rates of severe depression and did not find a correlation with hormonal birth control use, and depression is already named as a possible side effect listed on the package inserts. Then again, every drug has side effects, and most are not so good. So this study needs to be regarded in context, and part of that context is the depression women would find themselves in if there were no such contraceptives, and the surreal, severe depression they would find themselves in if it turned out that they were carrying unwanted pregnancies. Unforced Errors Department. Former tennis star Ilie Nastase, already under investigation for a racist comment about the skin color of Serena Williams' as yet unborn child, incited further rage last month after calling Great Britain captain Anne Kurtevang, who he sexually harassed, and player Johanna Konta, quote, effing bitches. He said the full word. He was thrown off the court, and Great Britain's Fed Cup playoff against Romania was suspended. Konta left the court in tears, but later returned and won the match. Nastase also shouted obscenities at the umpire and at a British woman journalist for having accurately reported his racist comments. The International Tennis Federation is investigating, and Nastase may face a lengthy ban from tennis for these and other sexist and racist rants. You know, in March of last year, Novak Djokovic denounced equal prize money for women in tennis. What is it with these Eastern European guys? They seem awfully protective of their rackets and awfully defensive about their balls. A day after the real and the not White House Correspondents' dinners, both of which honored the First Amendment and freedom of the press, Trump's chief of staff, Reince Priebus, said the White House is actively considering a change to libel laws affecting news reporting. Trump has called for this in more than one tweet. For example, the failing New York Times has disgraced the media world, gotten me wrong for 2 solid years. Change libel laws, close quote. Priebus complained of stories about constant contacts with Russia and all these other matters. Notice no mention that links between Trump aides and Russia are the subject of House, Senate, and FBI investigations, not only of major news outlets. Speaking of news outlets, another bad hombre at Fox News has, yes, bit the dust. Its co-president Bill Shine, colleague of fired sexual predators Roger Ailes and Bill O'Reilly, and pal of Sean Hannity. But we shouldn't be fooled about the Murdoch family, which owns Fox, or be fooled that they're acting from ethics. Daddy Rupert Murdoch has for years lusted to own European pay-TV Sky network. Already owns like 39%, but he wants all of it. But Sky is incorporated in the United Kingdom, and the UK has blessed regulators who observe public interest standards as to whether a company is, quote, fit and proper, close quote, to obtain media ownership in their jurisdiction. During the Murdoch tabloid hacking scandals 2 years ago, Rupert's $14.4 billion bid for Sky was rejected because the Murdoch companies were deemed not fit and proper. Now the Murdochs fear the Fox scandals may have the same effect, so that's why they're trying to clean up their act. I dare not spend much time on Trump's recent stupefying interviews, during which, among other statements, he denounced the Republican-majority Congress, his own party, said a government shutdown would be a good thing, and wondered aloud why the Civil War took place. He assured us that his hero, Andrew Jackson, a slaveholder and self-proclaimed Indian killer, who died 16 years before the Civil War, well, he could have negotiated a deal between the North and the South, whereas Abraham Lincoln was apparently a softy, unable to pull that off, probably because it was impossible without sacrificing the abolition of slavery. Trump also expressed more admiration for more dictators. It's getting to be too many to name, and he invited the proudly confessed murderer, current Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, to the White House. Fortunately, Duterte said he was too busy to come. New Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, speaking at the Milken Institute Global Conference this week, jovially related the Trumpian version of what happened at Mar-a-Lago on April 6. You know, that's the chocolate cake and I bombed Syria moment. Ross said, quote, "Just as dessert was being served, the president explained to Chinese President Xi he had something he wanted to tell him, which was the launching of 59 missiles into Syria. It was in lieu of after-dinner entertainment. The thing was, it didn't cost the president anything to have that entertainment." Close quote. And he and the crowd laughed and laughed. Last, a subtly surreal note on language. During FBI Director James Comey's testimony before the Senate Oversight Committee this past week, he was asked why he felt it was okay, despite all regulations and traditions to the contrary, to publicly release information a few days before the election about Hillary Clinton's email found on Anthony Weiner's computer, but why he did not release information that the FBI was, at that time and even earlier, investigating connections between the Trump campaign and Russian attempts to interfere with the election. In the contorted reasoning employed in his responses, he repeatedly described his dilemma as being whether to speak or to conceal on the Clinton issue. Now, those are weighted words. The antonym of speak would be silent or simply not speak. The antonym of conceal would be reveal or divulge. Think how differently this would have come across if he'd used those words. Instead, Comey implied that had he not violated rules regarding silence about an ongoing investigation of a candidate near an election, that would have been concealing such data, a word with negative implications of deliberate secrecy about misdeeds. But speak, on the other hand, has no such implications. It's clear and positive. Yet he used different language about why he and the FBI employed a double standard and, my word, concealed information that they were investigating the Trump campaign and the Russians. In that case, Comey defended his newfound reliance on department rules and traditions and used different protective terms for his decision. Quote, "keep the information secure," instead of using conceal, and quote, "not divulge," instead of speak. I doubt he even realizes how these language signals expose his own position on this double standard decision, which in itself is surreal. And now it's time for another short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be back directly with a guest who will help you answer. Some dumb man if he says, "Well, where are your great women artists anyway?" So don't go away. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again, this time with Donna Seaman, who is editor of adult books at Booklist and a member of the Advisory Council for the American Writers Museum, and she's a recipient of the James Friend Memorial Award for Literary Criticism and the Studs Terkel Humanities Service Award. She has come out with a new book, which is extremely interesting and is called Identity Unknown, Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists. And wow, is that worth rediscovering. Here she is. Donna, welcome. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Robin.
Congratulations on a very interesting book, Identity Unknown, Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists. This had a very, to me, touching gestation because your mother was an artist, wasn't she? And she was fairly unknown.
Yes, my mother is an artist, alive and well. I'm thrilled to say, in fact, 2 weeks ago, Elaine Seaman had a retrospective exhibition that opened at Vassar College at the old Palmer Gallery.
Oh, how great.
It was a thrilling occasion, an exquisite show. So, yes, I grew up watching a woman artist at work and have enjoyed her work and perspective on the world ever since I was very young.
Oh, that's just lovely. And the book came out of that consciousness that there are serious women artists who just vanish. I mean, and then the men turn around and say, "Well, where are your great women artists?" We know that line.
Exactly.
And why did you choose 7, and how did you choose these 7?
It really began first with watching my mother struggle with her dutifulness about being a mother and a wife and making art, and also loving art as a girl, going to museums, and being captivated by Louise Nevelson, who was a star, and her work just resonated with me so profoundly. Who knows why these affinities occur. And I was surprised to find her in this book because I don't think of her as unknown. Exactly, but she was one of the rare women stars. I mean, you would see her in magazines and television. Even if you didn't follow art, you knew about Louise Nevelson with her extravagant outfits and her long false eyelashes.
Right.
But she died in 1988, and as an art student, I would and someone who was reading in the arts, watch her disappear from art history books.
Huh.
Even books about modern sculpture, I would immediately turn to them and go, "Oh, which Nevelsons are they using as examples?" And found 0. And this started about 10 years ago, and I started thinking, how could this happen? And I felt that I wanted to write about that and think about that and celebrate her work in a personal way.
Yeah.
And then I thought, she's not alone in being forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
So this cued me to this problem that even women artists that managed a great effort to achieve recognition, once they were gone, our history would just forget about them, and they were left out. So I wanted to tell their stories, and I just sort of looked for artists whose work I had that same accordance with and who I just found impressive in every way. And 7 came about because I ended up writing long profiles, and I felt that was enough for a book to have 7. I see.
Well, there are very interesting cross-sectional 7. Say a few words about each one, if you don't mind, for the listeners, because I've had a chance to read the book, but they haven't.
Thank you. Yes, cross-section is exactly right. I had a few criteria. I wanted to only write about artists that were deceased. I also wanted to really focus on artists that worked with their hands, not photographers or filmmakers, so that shortened my list. I wanted to have both sculptors and painters, and I was also, so much of the story of American art is centered in New York, and that's another thing that happens to all artists out in the larger country, that they're not as well known nationally.
Right.
So there's some Chicago artists, because I am a New Yorker, but I've lived in Chicago many years. Fascinating art scene here, very different than New York.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a Chicago artist, a painter named Gertrude Abercrombie,
right,
who was also a pianist, who knew all the jazz players that used to come to Chicago in the 40s and 50s. She painted.
I never saw her work before. The very beautiful, I should add, prints in the book, and whoa, is she a riveting, spooky artist?
Oh, thank you. She is, isn't she? Self-portraits, but psychological portraits. Prairie landscapes, dark colors. They are spooky. They're eerie. They're also funny. She was very witty.
Yes, there's a quality about her work, and a personal quality as well, that she's like a sort of Northern Hemisphere Frida Kahlo.
Oh, yeah.
Without the bright color.
Very brooding.
Darker, brooding, yeah. Go on.
And so another painter, Bay Area painter, also did tons of self-portraits. I found Joan Brown to be such a dynamic, complete opposite of Gertrude Abercrombie, who was quite the recluse. Joan Brown was fearless. She swam on the San Francisco Bay. She traveled the world. She painted her life in sequence of different types of painting styles, beginning with a very expressive, thick impasto, moving on to very flat, very detailed paintings of herself and her son and her dogs and her homes, legitimizing a woman's life as a subject of fine art.
Yeah.
I wrote about Lenore Tawney, who was one of the fiber art pioneers. She was close friends with Agnes Martin, who people do know about, but Lenore's been not totally forgotten, but not widely known, partly because her work is so unusual. She dared to use very humble materials, thread, linen threads, wool thread, silk, to make fine art, enormous weavings, suspended sculptures. They're just magnificent. Deep thinking, a very philosophical artist, Lenore Tawney. Joan Brown, too. Great spiritual quests involved in their art. And Louise Nevelson, too, in her own cryptic way. And then another Chicago painter, also powerful work with images of the female body. That's Christina Ramberg. There's places in the book that look, very kinky, and she really explored that sexuality and also figures that are very kind of like medical illustrations and crucifixions and really rich and enigmatic pieces that I thought were they're just magnificent. And Ree Morton, another sculptor who worked with all kinds of, funky materials. She also was very witty and very tuned into the interface between art and society and women's place. And she loved language, too, so words play a role in her work, which I found very exciting.
And Milo Jones was
Lois Mailou Jones.
I never had encountered her work before at all, and it's stunning.
It's absolutely ravishing. She was African-American artist, born in Boston, close friends with Dorothy West, the Harlem Renaissance writer, was at Howard University for decades, and managed to turn herself really into an ambassador of art. Spent time in Paris as a young teacher, painted in the Impressionistic style, traveled all over Africa, sort of introducing African-American art to Africans and bringing African artists' contemporary work back to the States, a similar experience in Haiti, and her work incorporated elements of cultures that she experienced traveling all across Africa and living in Haiti, near Catherine Dunham, the famous choreographer.
Oh, yes.
They were neighbors and friends. And Lois was part of the great cultural movement through the 50s and 60s, but always, a painter first, a colorist of immense talent, and always evolving into her 90s, kept painting, achieved, some fame towards the end of her life, experienced when in the 40s when she couldn't submit her work to juried shows, even in Washington, D.C., at the Corcoran Gallery, because she was a person of color. Had a white friend bring her work in, and 50 years later received a public apology from the Smithsonian for that mistreatment. So she was a real warrior, brilliant artist.
Now, this is quite a resurrection that you've engineered here, and they're all 20th and 21st century artists.
Yes, all 20th century.
All 20th century artists, because, we should, somebody out there listening should bring back that amazing traveling collection it was assembled specifically for that purpose, something like 400 years of women's art that with the women's movement sort of put together in the 70s, I think. 70s, which was it's where I remember coming out of that exhibit and bursting into tears because Artemisia Gentileschi and I was meeting all of these extraordinary, going back, into the Quattrocento, and when we'd always been told, where are your great women artists? And also the schism between arts and crafts. Fine art is what boys did, and crafts is what girls did, And
exactly.
So we need to bring some of that back, and I think this book hopefully will be a beginning and whet the thirst of people for all that great buried talent which we've been deprived of.
Well, I hope so, too, and I was so pleased that we could include plates and illustrations in this book so you can see the work. And as I write in the coda, it was so interesting to me over the years I worked on this book. other people were seeking these artists out too. I always feel that artists come back when we need them. And there's something in the zeitgeist now where this work seems newly resonant and freshly significant and exciting. And there have been some exhibits. I would really love to see more by all these artists. A lot of their work has been in storage. It's just starting to emerge. So I feel very much that we're in a time of this renewed appreciation. And there's been other group biographies about women in other fields. Hidden Figures is one.
Oh, sure.
Dava Sobel's The Glass Universe is another. It was funny to kind of have my book come out in the midst of, I felt like secretly we were all in our little writing rooms doing very similar work because we all felt the need.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been priming the pump for, 45 years of this
Exactly.
of this feminist wave in the States, and maybe now there's a trickle. Hopefully the National Museum for Women in the Arts will do something more along this line. And, they are resurrecting lesser-known women artists, but I hope they should do an evening on the book. So
That would be great. I'd be there in a flash.
I'll pass it along. Thank you so much, Donna. It's a most interesting book. The plates are gorgeous. And the lives of these 7 women, some not known at all, some known a little, some, all of them known too little, are really testaments to the power of art and to the power of their talent and to their stubbornness as female human beings to do the work they were born to do. Thank you. The book is called Identity Unknown, Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists, and we've been talking with Donna Seaman, who is the author. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate this.
One last pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and yes, I'll be back in just a moment with those fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And welcome back again to some fighting words. Lately, I've been thinking about peace and reconciliation initiatives. In a sense, the founding of the United Nations after World War II was one such initiative. South Africa may have pioneered the idea in a bold national move after ending apartheid. Ireland, Burma, Rwanda, Tunisia are among countries with peace and reconciliation commissions daring to publicly expose and acknowledge atrocities committed by citizens against one another in the name of tribal, racial, or religious differences. In the United States, the post-Civil War Reconstruction was supposed to have that reconciliatory effect. But newly emancipated African Americans' hopes for real freedom, constitutional equality, and full citizenship were met with violent backlash from Southern white supremacists who promulgated the infamous Black Codes between 1800 and 1866, and by means of brute force and intimidation established the Jim Crow system of segregation and discrimination from which African Americans across the country suffer still. Slavery, of course, has rightly been called the original sin of this country, although it can also be argued that the conquest and, in many cases, eradication of indigenous peoples already living here was an original sin predating the concept of original sin that the Christian European conquerors brought with them. My point, though, is that for being a so-called nation of immigrants, American prejudices and the myth of nativism have been here from the start, have been consistent, toxic, even lethal, persist today, and are one of the 2 basic reasons, along with sexism, that Trump squats in our White House. Those who voted for Trump are the children or grandchildren of immigrants. As they cheer at Trump rallies and defend their leader even when he betrays them, one might wonder how they can have forgotten what their ancestors were forced to endure. But then, memory is selective, And they don't learn much about that in school. They don't learn that the first law preventing a specific ethnic group from emigrating to the United States was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, prohibiting all immigration of Chinese laborers. The Chinese had been tolerated when needed to build the railroads and work the early stages of the gold rush, but anti-Chinese animosity was politicized by labor leaders and by the Working Men's Party, that's its real name, blaming the Chinese instead of the bosses for depressed wages. The Immigration Act of 1924 was the first successful large-scale restriction of immigration. It banned outright, quote, Asiatics and their descendants, close quote, especially aiming to bar people from India, and it cut arrivals from countries outside the Americas in half, restricting entry mostly to Northern and Western Europeans. It also established strict quotas for Eastern and Southern Europe because those immigrants represented, quote, types of social inadequacy. This was tailored to restrict Jews, who were thought to be terrorists and Bolsheviks, and Slavic people who were regarded as genetically inferior. The act did encourage non-Jewish immigration from Germany and Britain, and those quotas remained in place for the most part until 1965. Trade union leaders supported this act, too, fearing a drop in wages if foreign workers were around to compete. Between 1820 and 1860, almost 2 million Irish arrived, 75% after the Irish famine. Many died making the trip due to disease and the foul conditions of what became known as coffin ships. They were met with signs reading, "Workers wanted, Irish need not apply." Poor, less skilled, uneducated, they were considered disruptive, dirty, and particularly evil because they were Catholics in what was increasingly being redefined as a Protestant country, even though the founders had clearly stated their intention that it not even be considered a Christian country. Italians were part of what got termed the new immigration from 1890 on. This third largest wave was a major shift from previous waves, which had consisted largely of Germans, Irish, British, Dutch, and Scandinavians. Between 1900 and 1915, 3 million Italians arrived, and more followed, the majority laborers or farmers fleeing poverty. They too experienced economic and ethnic prejudices because by now employers preferred the previously despised Slovaks and Poles. And when yesterday's immigrants, now established workers, mounted strikes in fear of new machinery being introduced in multiple industries, Italians became strikebreakers, scabs, filling jobs in construction, railroad, mining, and longshoring. The Mexicans, ironically, were already here, in their own country, when the United States annexed Texas in 1845, and many of them fled south. But they were exempted from the Immigration Act of 1924 because farmers argued that Mexican migrants were needed to work their crops. If you're beginning to suspect that this welcome huddled masses image has always been more about importing people when you need their labor and resenting them when you don't, bingo! If you also suspect that the labor movement was never as idealistically pure as many of us grew up thinking, double bingo! Even today, the phrase working class is subliminally defined as white, when it isn't. Welcome or not, they came. Greeks, Portuguese, Latin Americans, refugees from war like the Vietnamese, refugees from revolution like the Cubans, persecuted ethnic groups like the Hmong. Each group in turn has been defined as lazy, dirty, sly, subhumans who want to take our jobs and rape our women. Yes, do notice that the male voice was the one speaking and the one heard. And despite all empirical evidence that countries with a large variety of immigrants are more productive, innovative, wealthier, and faster growing, there's always been sufficient hatred waiting for all of them. The mass internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and the smaller internment of Italian Americans and German Americans during that same period. The poisonous names alone, screamed at children while they were being beaten up, children who then grew up to scream other names at other different-looking children. redskin, nigger, chink, coolie, frog, Polak, kike, mick, wop, jap, kraut, Scandahoovian, wetback, gusano, spick, guinea, dago, raghead. Oh my God, surely it's past time for the United States to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission of our own. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and be sure to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMCLive.com for the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes, and at iTunes Worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to our show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. And you can check out my own website and blog at robinmorgan.net and find me on Facebook and Twitter, too. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton, and our founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us, and don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.